I worked as an FAA air traffic controller at Malmstrom Air Force Base in 1966.
If you've ever wondered what air traffic controllers really see on their radar screens, you should hit that like button. Some contacts we track aren't in any flight plan. My name is Robert Hayes, and in 1966 I was working as a Federal Aviation Administration air traffic controller assigned to Malmstrom Air Force Base in central Montana. Malmstrom was a strategic air command installation, home to intercontinental ballistic missiles and the bomber wings that would deliver nuclear payloads in the event of war with the Soviet Union. My job was civilian liaison between FAA and military air traffic, coordinating commercial flights that passed through SAC airspace. It was tense work during tense times. The Cold War was at its height, and every radar contact had to be identified immediately. Soviet bombers probing our defenses, commercial airliners straying into restricted zones, weather anomalies that might mask incoming missiles. We tracked everything, logged everything, and reported everything according to strict protocols. Everything except the fast movers. Those we weren't supposed to see at all. I first encountered a fast mover on March 17, 1966 during the graveyard shift. I was alone in the civilian control room, monitoring the radar scope while my military counterpart handled SAC traffic in the adjacent facility. The arrangement was standard, civilian and military controllers working parallel shifts, coordinating when commercial traffic intersected with military operations. At 3:33 a.m., a contact appeared on my scope. No transponder code, no flight plan. Just a blip entering U.S. airspace from the north, coming down from the Canadian Arctic. I tracked it for about 15 seconds before I realized something was wrong. The contact was moving too fast, much too fast. I calculated the speed based on distance covered between sweeps of the radar. The mathematics were simple, but the result was impossible. The contact was traveling at approximately Mach 12 times the speed of sound. No aircraft in 1966 could achieve that velocity. The SR-71 Blackbird, our fastest plane, topped out at Mach 3.2. I grabbed the hotline to military control. "Captain Richards, you seeing this contact on your scope? Northbound track, entering from Canadian airspace?" There was a pause. Then Richards' voice came back, tense. "Affirmative. Fast mover. 333 event. Stand by for scramble authorization." 333 event. That was a designation I'd never heard before. But before I could ask what it meant, Richards was coordinating with SAC Command. Within 2 minutes, I heard F-106 interceptors launching from the flight line. 2 fighters racing to identify the impossible radar contact. I watched my scope as the F-106s climbed toward the fast mover's altitude. The contact was at 65,000 feet, descending. The fighters pushed their engines to combat power, climbing past 50,000 feet. The closing speed was incredible. If both objects maintained their current tracks, intercept would occur in approximately 90 seconds. At 60 seconds to intercept, the fast mover changed course. Not a gradual turn, but an instant 90-degree direction change. One moment heading south, the next moment heading east. No aircraft could make that kind of maneuver. The G-forces would have torn it apart, but the contact did it without slowing down. The F-106s adjusted course, pursuing. I could hear the pilots on the radio, their voices controlled but tight with adrenaline. Tango leader has visual contact. Single object, luminous, no visible means of propulsion. Pursuing at Angels 5-5. Angels 5-5 meant 55,000 feet. The fast mover was letting them get closer. Then, at 30 seconds to intercept, it did something that made my blood run cold. It stopped. Not slowed down, stopped. The radar contact went from Mach 12 to zero velocity in an instant. Just hung there in the sky at 65,000 feet, waiting. Tango Leader, you are cleared to close and identify, Richards transmitted. Weapons hold. Repeat, weapons hold. Close to visual identification only. The F-106s approached carefully. I watched the blips converge on my scope. Tango Leader reported, "Contact is a sphere, approximately 40 feet in diameter. Metallic surface, no markings, no visible seams or access panels. It's just floating there. No sound, no exhaust, nothing." Then the sphere moved again, not away from the fighters this time, toward them. The contact accelerated from 0 to Mach 8 in less than 2 seconds, straight at Tango Leader. The pilot's transmission cut off mid-word. His wingman, Tango 2, reported, "Tango Leader is gone. Object passed within 50 feet, and he just disappeared. I have no visual, no radio contact, no radar return. He's just gone." The fast mover continued accelerating. Within 10 seconds, it had reached the edge of my radar coverage and vanished. Tango 2 was ordered to return to base immediately. I sat there staring at my scope, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. A pilot had disappeared. Not crashed, not ejected, just gone. Richards came into my control room 30 minutes later, his face gray. "Did you log that contact?" "Of course," I said. "Standard procedure requires—" "No logs," Richards interrupted. "That contact never happened. Tango Leader's aircraft experienced mechanical failure and went down over the Rockies. Search and rescue is being organized. The fast mover was a weather balloon. You saw a weather balloon on your scope, and the pilot's disappearance is unrelated. Is that clear?" "Captain, a pilot just vanished," I protested. "We need to report this, investigate." "Hayes," Richard said, his voice dropping to a whisper, "this is my fourth 3 event in 6 months. I know what you saw, I know what it means, but we don't report these. We log them in a separate system. Send the data to Project Blue Book at Wright-Patterson, and we never speak about them again. Those are the rules. If you want to keep your security clearance and your job, you follow the rules." "What happened to Tango Leader?" I asked. "Where did he go?" Richards looked at me for a long moment. "He'll come back. They always come back. But when he does, he won't remember what happened. And neither will you if you're smart." He left me alone with my dark scope and my racing thoughts. My first fast mover encounter, and already I was being told to forget what I'd seen. But I couldn't forget. And over the next 6 months, I'd see 23 more fast movers, all at 3:33 a.m., all following the same pattern, all resulting in the same orders. Log nothing, report nothing, forget everything. The second 333 event occurred exactly 1 week later. March 24th, 3:33 a.m. Another contact entering from the north, same impossible speed, same luminous sphere when fighters got close. This time the pilot, Captain Morrison, was more cautious. He maintained distance and just observed while the sphere performed its impossible maneuvers. But then the sphere did something new. It projected what Morrison described as a beam of light. Coherent, focused, directed straight at his aircraft. The moment the beam hit, Morrison's radio went dead. His radar return disappeared from our scopes. For 17 minutes, we had no idea where he was or if he was alive. When he came back, Morrison was flying normally, responding to radio calls, acting like nothing had happened. But when he landed and was debriefed, he had no memory of those 17 minutes. His flight recorder showed the gap. 17 minutes of missing data, as if the aircraft had simply ceased to exist for that period. The medical staff examined him. No physical injuries, no radiation exposure. But his eyes were different. The flight surgeon noted it in his report. Pupil dilation response abnormal, suggests possible neurological event. Morrison was grounded for 2 weeks of observation. I started keeping my own logs. Secret records of every fast mover encounter, every pilot who went missing and came back changed. I hid the documents in my apartment, knowing that if anyone found them, I'd be in serious trouble. But I needed to understand what was happening. Needed to find a pattern. The patterns emerged quickly. Fast movers always appeared at 3:33 a.m. Always entered from the north, from the direction of the Arctic Circle. Always traveled at speeds between Mach 8 and Mach 14. And always, when fighters got close enough, the pilots would experience some kind of event. Disappearance, memory loss, missing time. The specifics varied, but the core pattern held. By June 1966, I'd documented 14 333 events, 14 pilots affected. All of them returned physically intact, but psychologically altered. They couldn't remember the encounters, but they reported strange dreams afterward. Dreams of lights, of being inside something vast and bright, of voices that spoke without words. I tried to report my findings through official channels. Wrote a memo to my FAA supervisor detailing the encounters and suggesting we needed a formal investigation. The response was swift and harsh. I was called into a meeting with 3 people I'd never seen before. No names, no credentials, just 3 men in dark suits who made it very clear that my memo had been intercepted and classified. Mr. Hayes, the oldest one, said, "You've been tracking phenomena that fall under military jurisdiction. Your observations have been noted and forwarded to the appropriate authorities. You will cease all independent documentation and delete any records you've created. Any further unauthorized investigation will result in the revocation of your security clearance and termination of your employment. I have a right to report safety hazards," I said. "These objects are operating in controlled airspace. They're a threat to commercial aviation. These objects," the man said, "are being monitored by agencies with far more resources and authority than the FAA. Your job is to control civilian air traffic. Anything beyond that scope is not your concern." Am I making myself clear? I understood the threat. Stop investigating or lose everything. I told them I'd comply. But I didn't delete my records. I just hid them better. That's when I met Dr. Alan Hynek. He was the scientific consultant for Project Blue Book, the Air Force's official UFO investigation program. He came to Malmstrom in July 1966, ostensibly to interview pilots about atmospheric phenomena, but when we spoke privately, he made it clear he knew about the fast movers. The 333 events are of particular interest to Blue Book, Hynek said. We've been tracking similar phenomena at multiple SAC bases across the northern tier. Malmstrom, Minot, Grand Forks, Ellsworth, all reporting the same pattern. Radar contacts at precisely 3:33 a.m., impossible velocities, pilot encounters resulting in missing time and memory loss. "Do you know what they are?" I asked. Hynek was quiet for a moment. Officially, weather balloons, atmospheric reflections, instrument malfunctions. That's what Blue Book will conclude in our reports. But unofficially, these objects are demonstrating technology far beyond anything in our arsenal or the Soviets. The precision of their timing, the consistency of their behavior, suggests intelligence. Purpose. They're not random atmospheric phenomena. Then why the cover-up? Why not tell the public? Because telling the public would raise questions we can't answer, Hynek said. Where do they come from? What do they want? Why are they targeting SAC bases specifically? We don't know. And admitting we don't know, admitting we have objects operating in our airspace that we can't intercept or identify would undermine confidence in our military capabilities, especially now with the Cold War so tense. So we just pretend they don't exist? We acknowledge they exist, Hynek said. We just classify the acknowledgement at levels where it can't cause panic. And we study them, quietly, carefully, hoping to understand them before they become a public crisis. What about the pilots? I asked. What's happening to them during those missing time events? Hynek's expression darkened. That's what concerns me most. The medical examinations show subtle neurological changes. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would impair their ability to fly. But their brain chemistry has been altered. Specifically, the areas associated with memory formation and recall. It's like someone opened up their heads, removed specific memories, and sealed everything back up without leaving obvious evidence. Who could do that? I asked. The Soviets? If the Soviets had technology that advanced, they'd have won the Cold War already. No, whatever is doing this, it's not human. At least, not human as we understand it. Over the next 3 months, the fast-mover encounters intensified. What had been weekly events became nightly occurrences. Every night at 3:33 a.m., one or more contacts would appear on our scopes. Sometimes just one. Sometimes as many as 5, all following the same impossible flight patterns. The pilots who'd experienced encounters started forming an unofficial support group. They'd meet in the officers' club, drinking and sharing their fragmented memories, trying to piece together what had happened to them during those missing minutes. None of them could remember clearly, but they all described the same sensations: weightlessness, brightness, a sense of being examined by something vast and incomprehensible. One pilot, Major Thomas Bradford, started keeping a journal of his dreams following his encounter. He showed me the entries. They were disturbing. Sketches of geometric patterns that hurt to look at. Descriptions of spaces that had too many dimensions. And repeatedly the phrase, "They're preparing us for something. We're being changed to serve a purpose we don't yet understand." Bradford died in September. Officially, it was a training accident. His F-106 went into an uncontrolled spin during a routine flight and crashed in the mountains. But I'd seen his last radar track. There was nothing routine about that flight. He'd been pursuing another fast mover when his aircraft suddenly accelerated to impossible speeds and dove straight into the ground. The crash investigation ruled it pilot error, but I knew better. The other pilots knew too. Bradford's death changed the atmosphere at Malmstrom. Fear replaced curiosity. Nobody wanted to encounter the fast movers anymore. But we didn't get a choice. They kept coming every night, 3:33 a.m. In October, something new happened. A fast mover didn't just appear on radar, it landed. Just touched down on the runway at 3:33 a.m. like it was a scheduled arrival. No communication, no clearance, just descended from the sky and settled onto the concrete. The base went into lockdown. Security forces surrounded the object, maintaining a perimeter while waiting for orders. I watched from the control tower as the sphere sat there, glowing softly, doing nothing. It stayed for exactly 33 minutes, then it lifted off vertically, accelerated to Mach 10 in seconds, and vanished from our scopes. The runway where it had landed was examined. No burn marks, no residue, no physical evidence it had been there. Except for one thing. The concrete showed a subtle discoloration in a perfect circle where the sphere had rested, and that circle was slightly radioactive. Not enough to be dangerous, but measurable. The radiation signature matched nothing in our database. After that night, the rules changed. We received new directives from SAC Command. Fast movers were now classified as Threat Level Alpha. Pilots were authorized to fire on them if they entered restricted airspace over missile silos. The rules of engagement had shifted from observe and report to intercept and destroy. I thought this was insane. We'd been tracking these objects for months. They'd demonstrated capabilities far beyond ours. What made anyone think we could destroy them? The answer came 3 nights later. An F-106 pilot, Captain James Wheeler, got authorization to fire on a fast mover that had appeared over a Minuteman missile field. He locked his AM-4 Falcon missiles and fired both of them. The missiles tracked true should have hit the sphere dead center. The sphere caught the missiles, not with any visible mechanism, just stopped them in midair, held them there for a few seconds, then sent them back. Wheeler had maybe 2 seconds to eject before his own missiles destroyed his aircraft. He survived the ejection but broke both legs in the landing. And during his hospital stay, he started talking. Not about the fast movers, about what he'd seen when the sphere stopped the missiles. He said there were beings inside, not human, but humanoid, watching him, studying him, and in that brief moment of connection, he understood something. The fast movers weren't attacking. They were monitoring, observing the nuclear weapons we had pointed at each other and at the sky, making sure we didn't do something catastrophic. Wheeler was immediately transferred to a psychiatric facility, officially diagnosed with post-traumatic stress from the ejection. But I'd talked to him before the transfer. He was lucid, rational, terrified, but not insane. And he kept repeating the same warning. They're not here to hurt us. They're here to stop us from hurting ourselves. But if we keep trying to shoot them down, they might decide we're too dangerous to leave alone. By November 1966, I'd had enough. I couldn't continue participating in a cover-up that was clearly getting people killed. I decided to take my documentation to the press, expose the fast movers, force a public investigation, make the government acknowledge what was happening in our skies. I was packing my files when Richards appeared at my apartment door. "How did you know?" I asked. "We monitor everyone who works at SAC bases," he said. "Phone calls, mail, associations. When we saw you making contact with reporters, we had to intervene." "Are you going to arrest me?" "No," Richards said, "but I'm going to show you something. Something that might change your mind about going public." He drove me to a secure facility outside the base. Underground levels I hadn't known existed. And there, in a sealed chamber, I saw what they'd recovered from one of the fast movers. Not the whole craft, apparently those disintegrated when their power systems failed. But pieces, fragments. Technology so advanced our best scientists couldn't understand it. And something else, a body. Not human, but close enough to be disturbing. Humanoid, about 4 feet tall, with large eyes and gray skin. Dead, preserved in some kind of stasis field. The being that had piloted one of the fast movers before it crashed in 1964. "This is what you want to reveal to the world?" Richards asked. "You think the American public is ready to know that we're being visited by non-human intelligence? That we're being monitored by beings with technology centuries ahead of ours? That we've shot down some of their craft and dissected their pilots?" "People have a right to know," I said. "People have a right to safety and stability," Richards countered. "Knowledge of this would cause mass panic. Religious crisis. Social upheaval. The government has decided that controlled secrecy is preferable to chaotic disclosure. And if you try to force disclosure, you'll be discredited, institutionalized, or worse." He drove me back to my apartment, left me with a final warning. "Your choice, Hayes. Keep the secret and keep your life. Or expose the truth and lose everything, including the truth itself. Because they'll classify your evidence, discredit your testimony, and make sure nobody believes you." I thought about it for days. The smart choice was obvious. Destroy my files, stop investigating, accept the cover-up and live a normal life. But every night at 3:33 a.m., I'd watch my radar scope, watch the fast movers appear like clockwork. And I'd think about all the pilots who'd been changed, all the questions left unanswered. In December 1966, I made my decision. I wasn't going to the press, not because I was afraid of the consequences, but because I realized Richards was right. The world wasn't ready. Maybe it never would be. But I also wasn't going to destroy my documentation. I was going to keep recording, keep observing, keep building a record of what was really happening at 3:33 a.m. And someday, when the time was right, when humanity was ready to know, I'd have the evidence needed to prove it all. That was 58 years ago. I'm 83 now, and the fast movers are still being tracked, still appearing at SAC bases at 3:33 a.m., still demonstrating impossible capabilities while the government pretends they don't exist. I kept my files, kept adding to them over the years as reports filtered in from other controllers, other bases. And now, I'm finally ready to share what I know. Because the fast movers are changing their pattern. The encounters are becoming more frequent, more direct, and the message they're sending is getting harder to ignore. They're preparing us for something that's coming whether we're ready or not. I stayed at Malmstrom until 1968, documenting every fast mover encounter while pretending to follow the official silence protocol. But the incidents were escalating. What had started as weekly radar contacts became nightly occurrences, and the patterns were changing in ways that suggested the phenomenon was evolving, adapting, or preparing for something. In January 1967, we started seeing multiple fast movers appearing simultaneously. Not just one contact at 3:33 a.m., but formations of 3 to 7 objects, all moving in coordinated patterns. They'd perform what looked like aerial maneuvers, formation flying at impossible speeds, executing synchronized turns that should have torn any physical craft apart. The Air Force brought in their top physicists to observe. I watched them track the formations on radar, calculate the G-forces involved in those maneuvers, and conclude that no material substance could withstand those stresses. Whatever the fast movers were made of, it wasn't metal or any known alloy. One scientist suggested they might be pure energy held in coherent shapes by forces we didn't understand. But the most disturbing change wasn't the formations. It was the communication attempts. Starting in February 1967, the fast movers began transmitting radio signals on military frequencies. Not random static or interference, but structured transmissions that sounded almost like language. The signals were recorded and sent to cryptanalysis teams at the NSA. I never saw the official NSA reports, but Captain Richards told me what they'd found. The transmissions contained mathematical sequences, prime numbers, pi to hundreds of decimal places, fundamental physical constants. Whoever or whatever was sending these signals knew advanced mathematics and physics. They were demonstrating intelligence trying to establish communication in a universal language. The Air Force's response was to ignore the transmissions and continue treating the fast movers as hostile unknowns. But some of us couldn't ignore them. A small group of controllers and pilots started meeting unofficially to discuss what we were witnessing. We called ourselves the 333 Group, and we were convinced that the fast movers were attempting first contact. Dr. Hynek attended one of our meetings in March 1967. He'd been tracking the fast movers across multiple SAC bases and had reached the same conclusion. These aren't random atmospheric phenomena, he told us. These are deliberate, repeated attempts to communicate with humanity's military and nuclear infrastructure. They're monitoring our weapons, our capabilities, and trying to establish dialogue. But why? Someone asked. If they're so advanced, why don't they just land at the White House and demand to speak to our leaders? Hynek had a theory. Maybe they're following protocols we don't understand. Maybe overt contact violates some principle they consider important. Or maybe they're testing us, seeing if we're intelligent enough to recognize communication when we see it, peaceful enough to respond with curiosity instead of weapons. We're failing that test, I said. Every time they appear, we scramble fighters and try to shoot them down. Exactly, Hynek replied. And I suspect they're keeping score, tracking how we respond, measuring our readiness for contact. If we keep responding with hostility, they may decide we're too primitive or too dangerous for open communication. The 333 group started a petition. We wanted the Air Force to change the rules of engagement, to attempt communication instead of interception. We gathered signatures from 47 controllers, pilots, and radar operators across 4 SAC bases. We sent it up the chain of command with a detailed analysis of the fast mover behavior patterns and our recommendations for establishing peaceful contact. The response came down in April 1967. The petition was classified and sealed. All signatories were interviewed by military intelligence, and the rules of engagement didn't change. They intensified. New orders stated that any fast mover entering airspace over nuclear weapons facilities was to be fired upon immediately, without waiting for authorization. The 333 group was ordered to disband. Half our members were transferred to different bases. The other half, including me, were placed under close surveillance. Our phone calls were monitored. Our mail was screened. We were being watched to ensure we didn't try to go public with what we knew. That's when I realized the government wasn't just covering up the fast movers. They were protecting something else. Some deeper secret that the fast movers' appearance threatened to reveal. And I became determined to find out what that secret was. I started digging through old Air Force records, looking for historical precedents. Fast mover sightings didn't start in 1966. I found references going back to 1948, right after the Roswell incident. Radar operators at SAC bases in the late 1940s had reported similar contacts, objects moving at impossible speeds, appearing and disappearing from screens, behaving in ways that defied physics. But the really interesting pattern emerged when I correlated fast mover sightings with nuclear weapons activity. Every major spike in fast mover encounters coincided with significant nuclear events. The 1952 sightings peaked during massive weapons tests in Nevada. The 1962 surge happened during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And our 1966 to 1967 encounters were occurring as the U.S. expanded its ICBM arsenal and began deploying multiple warheads. The fast movers weren't randomly visiting Earth. They were specifically monitoring humanity's nuclear capabilities. And the more weapons we built, the more frequently they appeared. It was as if they were keeping watch, making sure we didn't destroy ourselves or threaten something beyond our world. I shared this analysis with Hynek during one of his visits to Malmstrom. He nodded slowly. You've identified what Blue Book has suspected for years. These objects are drawn to nuclear technology. We see them at weapons tests, missile bases, nuclear power plants. Whatever they are, they're very interested in our ability to split the atom. Why? I asked. What does it matter to them if we have nuclear weapons? Hynek pulled out a folder marked Classified. Inside were photographs from various fast mover encounters, but these weren't just radar images. These were actual photographs of the objects, taken by military pilots who'd gotten close enough for visual contact. The spheres I'd seen described in reports, but also other shapes. Discs, triangles, cylinders, all demonstrating the same impossible flight characteristics. One photograph caught my attention. It showed a disc-shaped object hovering above a Minuteman missile silo. The missile's nose cone was visible through an open hatch, and the object was directing some kind of beam at the warhead. According to the accompanying report, that missile had been rendered inoperable after the encounter. The warhead's arming mechanism had been destroyed without triggering an explosion. "They're disabling our nuclear weapons," I said. "Selectively," Hynek confirmed. "Not all of them, just certain ones. We're not sure how they choose which warheads to disable, but over the past 2 years we've had 17 instances of nuclear weapons being rendered inoperable after fast-mover encounters. The warheads weren't damaged in ways that would cause detonation. They were surgically neutralized, as if someone reached inside and removed specific components." "That's an act of war," I said. "They're attacking our strategic deterrent." "Or they're preventing a war," Hynek countered. "Think about it. If you were a civilization monitoring a primitive species that had just discovered atomic weapons, and you saw them pointing those weapons at each other, building enough bombs to destroy their own planet, what would you do? Would you intervene? Disable some of the weapons to reduce the chance of catastrophic use? So they're trying to protect us from ourselves? Possibly. Or they're protecting something else. Themselves, perhaps. If we detonate enough nuclear weapons, we might contaminate our atmosphere or destabilize something that affects regions beyond Earth. We don't know the full consequences of nuclear war. Maybe they do." In May 1967, I witnessed something that confirmed Hynek's theory. A fast mover appeared on radar at 3:33 a.m., following the usual pattern. But this time, instead of appearing over empty airspace, it materialized directly above a convoy of trucks transporting nuclear warheads from Malmstrom to another facility. The convoy included 6 warheads destined for deployment on Minuteman II missiles. The fast mover paced the convoy for 17 miles, maintaining position directly overhead. Security forces reported seeing a luminous sphere about 40 feet in diameter, glowing with blue-white light, keeping perfect formation with the trucks below. When the convoy reached its destination, the sphere performed one complete circle around the facility, then accelerated vertically and vanished. Every single warhead in that convoy was subsequently found to be inoperable. Not damaged, not compromised. Simply dead. The firing mechanisms had been deactivated in a way our weapons technicians couldn't explain. It was as if someone had reached into the electronics and turned them off without leaving any physical trace. The Air Force went ballistic. How could an unknown object disable 6 nuclear warheads without physically touching them? What kind of technology could selectively destroy electronic components from a distance? And, most importantly, if they could disable our warheads, what else could they do? New defensive measures were implemented. Convoys now traveled with fighter escorts. Missile silos were equipped with advanced detection systems, and orders were given to shoot down any fast mover that approached nuclear weapons, regardless of the risk. But the fast movers adapted. They started appearing in greater numbers, overwhelming our ability to respond. On June 3, 1967, 12 fast movers appeared simultaneously over Malmstrom's missile fields. We had 4 F-106s on alert status. Simple mathematics. We couldn't intercept all 12 objects. While our fighters chased some, the others had free access to the silos. That night, 22 Minuteman missiles were rendered inoperable. 22 ICBMs, representing a significant portion of Malmstrom's nuclear strike capability, disabled in a single coordinated action. The message was clear. You can't stop us. We can access your weapons whenever we choose. The Pentagon response was predictable. They classified the entire incident at the highest level and began developing new weapons specifically designed to counter the fast movers. I learned about this from a weapons designer who visited Malmstrom to assess our defensive needs. He told me they were working on directed energy weapons, lasers and particle beams that could track and destroy objects moving at hypersonic speeds. These craft moved too fast for conventional missiles, he explained. By the time our weapons lock on, they're already gone. But directed energy weapons travel at the speed of light. If we can paint a target with laser designation, we can hit it no matter how fast it moves. When will these weapons be operational? I asked. Current timeline is 3 to 5 years, he said. We're still working out the power requirements and targeting systems, but once they're deployed, we'll have the capability to defend against these objects effectively. I didn't tell him what I was thinking, that by the time we had weapons capable of destroying fast movers, they'd have adapted again. They'd demonstrated remarkable ability to evolve their tactics in response to our defenses. An arms race with beings this advanced seemed futile. In July 1967, one of the pilots from the 333 group, Major David Saldana, had an encounter that changed everything. He was scrambled to intercept a fast mover over a missile field, standard protocol. But this time, instead of fleeing or disabling his aircraft, the fast mover allowed him to approach. It slowed down, matched his speed, and flew in formation with his F-106. Saldana reported that he could see inside the object. Not through windows. The sphere had no visible openings. But he could perceive the interior as if the hull had become transparent. And inside, he saw beings. Humanoid figures, 3 of them, standing in what looked like a control room filled with light. One of them looked directly at Saldana, made eye contact across the distance between aircraft and sphere. And in that moment, Saldana said he understood something, not through words or transmitted thoughts, but through a kind of direct knowing. The beings weren't hostile. They were concerned, worried about what humanity was doing with nuclear technology, and they wanted help. They were looking for humans who understood the danger, who could influence policy, who might help steer humanity away from nuclear catastrophe. They were seeking allies. Saldana maintained visual contact for almost 3 minutes before the sphere accelerated and disappeared. When he landed, he was immediately debriefed by intelligence officers. They asked him hundreds of questions about what he'd seen, what he'd felt, whether the beings had communicated anything specific. Saldana told them the truth, that the fast movers were attempting communication, that they were worried about our nuclear weapons, that they wanted to help us avoid catastrophe, and that we should be listening instead of shooting. The intelligence officers classified his report and grounded him for psychiatric evaluation. Saldana spent 2 weeks in a military hospital being tested for everything from hallucinations to foreign agent brainwashing. When he was finally released, he was transferred to a desk job in Alaska and ordered never to speak about the encounter again. But Saldana had told me everything before his transfer, and he'd given me something else, a sketch he'd made of what he saw inside the sphere. The beings, the control room, the equipment. I added it to my files, another piece of evidence that the fast movers were more than just unidentified objects. They were vehicles piloted by intelligent beings with motivations we needed to understand. By August 1967, I'd accumulated over 200 pages of documentation. Radar logs, pilot testimonies, photographs, analysis. Proof that something extraordinary was happening in our skies and that the government was actively covering it up. I knew I couldn't keep this secret forever. Eventually, it would have to come out. That's when I was approached by someone from the National Security Agency. No name, no credentials, just a man who showed up at my apartment and made an offer. The NSA had been monitoring the fast movers independently of Project Blue Book. They'd reached conclusions that aligned with mine. These were non-human intelligences attempting contact, specifically focused on nuclear weapons. We want to establish communication, the NSA man said. Formal, structured contact. But we can't do it through military channels. The Air Force's priority is defense, not dialogue. We need civilians involved, people like you, who understand the phenomenon and aren't bound by military thinking. What are you proposing? I asked, A secret program, he said. Operating outside official channels, a small group of air traffic controllers, scientists, and linguists attempting to decode the fast movers' transmissions and establish two-way communication. You'd maintain your position at Malmstrom as cover, but your real work would be analyzing their signals and developing response protocols. And if we succeed, if we establish contact, then we'll have achieved what Project Blue Book never could: actual communication with non-human intelligence. We'll have answers to questions humanity has asked for centuries: where they come from, what they want, why they're here. It sounded too good to be true. And in my experience, things that sounded too good to be true usually were. But I was tired of watching from the sidelines, tired of documenting encounters without being able to do anything about them. "I'm in," I said. The NSA program was called Project Aquarius. It operated from a facility in Maryland, far from any SAC base, with a team of 12 people cleared at levels above top secret. Our job was to collect and analyze every fast mover transmission, looking for patterns, meaning, intent. We worked with the best cryptanalysts in the country. They'd broken enemy codes during World War II and the Korean War. But the fast mover signals were unlike anything they'd encountered. The mathematical sequences were straightforward, clearly intentional communication using universal constants. But embedded within those sequences were other patterns: modulations, frequencies, timing variations that might contain additional information. One of our linguists, Dr. Zoe Morrison, proposed a radical theory. What if the signals aren't language as we understand it? What if there's something more fundamental? A direct encoding of concepts and ideas bypassed traditional linguistic structures. She developed an analytical framework based on that assumption. Instead of looking for words or grammar, she searched for conceptual patterns, recurring combinations of frequencies that might represent ideas like danger, peace, weapon, or communication. After 6 months of analysis, Morrison identified 17 distinct conceptual units that appeared repeatedly across different transmissions. She created a lexicon, a preliminary dictionary of fast mover communication. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Using Morrison's lexicon, we attempted to decode a transmission recorded during a major fast mover incident in September 1967. That night, over 30 objects had appeared simultaneously over SAC bases across the northern tier. They'd performed coordinated maneuvers while broadcasting continuously on multiple frequencies. Morrison's analysis of that transmission was chilling. Based on her conceptual framework, the fast movers had been sending a warning. The message roughly translated to nuclear weapons, danger to all, reduced capability, or intervention required. They were telling us to disarm, and threatening some kind of intervention if we didn't. I presented Morrison's findings to the Project Aquarius leadership. They were skeptical but couldn't dismiss the possibility that she was right. If the fast movers were warning us about nuclear weapons, we needed to understand the nature of their threatened intervention. Were they planning to disable all our warheads, destroy our weapons facilities, or something more extreme? We decided to attempt communication, to send our own transmission during the next fast mover encounter, using Morrison's conceptual framework to craft a message. We would acknowledge their concern about nuclear weapons while making clear that disarmament required time and political will. We'd ask for patience, for continued dialogue, for partnership, instead of intervention. The opportunity came on October 15, 1967. Fast movers appeared over Malmstrom at 3:33 a.m., following their usual pattern. But this time, we were ready. We'd installed a high-powered transmitter capable of broadcasting on the same frequencies the fast movers used. And we'd prepared our message, encoded in the conceptual patterns Morrison had identified. At 3:35 a.m., we transmitted, sent our carefully crafted message into the sky, hoping the fast movers would receive it, understand it, and respond. For 90 seconds, nothing happened. The fast movers continued their standard flight pattern, ignoring our transmission. I thought we'd failed, that Morrison's lexicon was wrong or incomplete. Then every fast mover on our radar scopes stopped moving. All 7 objects. They simply hung there in the sky, motionless, as if they were listening. And they responded. A transmission came back, much more complex than anything we'd recorded before. Morrison worked frantically to decode it while the objects waited. After 10 minutes of analysis, she looked up with tears in her eyes. "They understood us," she said. "They actually understood. And they're responding." The decoded message was longer than anything we'd sent. But the core meaning was clear. Acknowledged. Communication established. Warning remains. But dialogue possible. Choose wisely. Time limited. The fast movers held position for another 5 minutes, giving us time to process their response. Then, in perfect synchronization, all 7 objects accelerated and disappeared from our scopes. We'd done it. After years of encounters, after hundreds of missed opportunities, we'd finally established two-way communication with the fast movers. And their message, while still containing a warning, also offered hope. Dialogue was possible. We could work with them instead of against them. But that hope was short-lived, because within hours of our successful communication, Project Aquarius was shut down. Federal agents arrived at our facility, confiscated all our equipment and records, and informed us that the program was being terminated immediately. No explanation, no discussion. Just orders to forget everything we'd learned and never speak about Project Aquarius again. I'd achieved what I'd set out to do, establish contact with the beings piloting the fast movers. But instead of being celebrated or continued, our work was buried. And I was left with more questions than ever. Why shut down a program that had just succeeded in its primary mission? What threat did successful communication pose? And what were the fast movers planning if we didn't heed their warning about nuclear weapons? I wouldn't get answers to those questions for another 50 years. But when I finally did, I'd wish I'd stayed ignorant. After Project Aquarius was shut down in October 1967, I was transferred out of Malmstrom. Not fired, not arrested, just quietly reassigned to a civilian FAA facility in Denver handling commercial traffic. No more SAC bases, no more classified work, no more fast movers. They thought removing me from the environment would make me forget. It didn't. I kept my hidden documentation, added to it whenever I could get information from contacts still working at SAC bases. The fast mover encounters continued through the late 1960s and into the 1970s, always following the same pattern. 3:33 a.m. impossible speeds, nuclear weapons interest, and occasional attempts at communication that were systematically ignored by military leadership. I retired from the FAA in 1986, moved to a small town in Montana, and tried to live a quiet life. But the fast movers never left my thoughts. Every night at 3:33 a.m., I'd wake up automatically, conditioned by years of tracking them. I'd wonder if they were still appearing, still trying to communicate, still waiting for humanity to listen. Then, in 2017, something happened that brought everything back into focus. The New York Times published an article about a Pentagon program investigating UFOs. They used different terminology, UAPS, unidentified aerial phenomena, but the descriptions were familiar. Objects moving at hypersonic speeds, impossible maneuvers, interest in military installations. The fast movers, finally getting public acknowledgement. The article mentioned that the Pentagon program had been running from 2007 to 2012. 5 years of investigation that concluded what I'd known for 50 years. These objects were real. They demonstrated technology beyond our capabilities, and they posed questions we couldn't answer. But the article also revealed something I hadn't known. The modern UAP encounters were different from my 1960s experiences. The objects were appearing more frequently. Their interactions with military aircraft were more aggressive. And they were showing up over nuclear-powered naval vessels, not just land-based weapons facilities. The phenomenon was escalating. Whatever patience the fast movers had shown during my era seemed to be wearing thin. I decided it was time to come forward. I was 82 years old. Most of the people who'd ordered me to stay silent were dead. The official narrative was beginning to change. If I didn't share what I knew now, I'd take it to my grave. I contacted the New York Times reporter who'd written the UAP article. Sent him a package containing copies of my documentation, 50 years of radar logs, pilot testimonies, photographs, and analysis. Evidence of a phenomenon that had been occurring since at least 1947 and had never been adequately explained to the public. The reporter, Jerry Lansing, met with me in Montana. We spent 3 days going through my files while I told him everything. The 3:33 a.m. pattern, the missing time incidents, Project Aquarius, the successful communication attempt and its subsequent suppression. Lansing was skeptical at first, but the documentation was overwhelming. I had radar images, official reports, photographs, and corroborating testimony from other witnesses who were still alive. This wasn't conspiracy theory. This was documented history that had been classified and hidden. The article Lansing wrote was published in February 2018. It was explosive. Detailed accounts of fast mover encounters from the 1960s, including the Project Aquarius communication success. Evidence that the government had established contact with non-human intelligence and then covered it up. Proof that UAPs had been disabling nuclear weapons for decades. The response was immediate and polarized. Some people believed it, saw it as confirmation of what UFO researchers had claimed for years. Others dismissed it as elderly delusion or disinformation. The Pentagon declined to comment. Project Blue Book's old files were suddenly reclassified, and I received threats, anonymous calls warning me to retract my testimony or face consequences. But something else happened too. Other witnesses started coming forward. Controllers from SAC bases in the 1970s and 1980s who'd seen similar phenomena. Pilots who'd encountered fast movers and experienced missing time. Scientists who'd worked on classified programs attempting to understand the technology. We formed a loose network, the veterans of the phenomenon we called ourselves. About 40 people, all retired, all willing to speak publicly about what we'd seen. We gave interviews, testified before congressional committees, shared our documentation with researchers, and slowly the narrative began to change. The stigma around UFO reporting started to lift. Active duty military personnel felt empowered to report encounters they'd previously kept silent about. The government couldn't maintain the cover-up in the face of so many credible witnesses. But with the changing narrative came new questions. If the fast movers had been visiting Earth since the 1940s, what did they want? Why the focus on nuclear weapons? And what was the intervention they'd threatened if we didn't change our behavior? I found some answers in 2019 when I was contacted by Dr. Zoe Morrison. She was 78 now, still sharp, still working on the problem she'd started with Project Aquarius 52 years earlier. After the program was shut down, she'd continued her research privately, refining her conceptual framework for understanding fast mover communication. She'd spent decades analyzing every recorded transmission, looking for patterns and meaning, and she'd made a breakthrough. The fast movers weren't just warning us about nuclear weapons. They were warning us about something specific, a threshold we were approaching, a point of no return. Morrison showed me her latest analysis. The mathematical sequences the fast movers transmitted weren't random demonstrations of intelligence. They were calculations. Predictions of when humanity's nuclear weapons stockpile would reach a critical mass that would trigger some kind of catastrophic event. Not a war, Morrison explained. Something worse. The calculations suggest that when we reach a certain density of nuclear weapons in specific geographic configurations, we'll create what they call a resonance cascade. The weapons themselves, even without being detonated, will destabilize something fundamental. Space-time, dimensional boundaries, something we don't have physics to describe. Are you saying our nuclear weapons are dangerous just by existing? I asked. In sufficient quantities and configurations, yes. The fast movers have been trying to tell us this since the beginning, that we're building toward a threshold that, once crossed, will cause damage we can't undo. And according to my latest calculations based on current weapons deployments, we're going to cross that threshold within the next 20 years. What happens when we cross it? Morrison pulled up a series of equations I couldn't follow. Based on their transmissions, there will be what they term a dimensional breach. Our reality will intersect with something else. Another dimension, another universe. We don't have the framework to understand it. But the consequences will be catastrophic. Not just for Earth, but for a wider area of space-time they're part of. So they're not warning us for our sake, I said. They're warning us because we're threatening them. Morrison nodded. We're like children playing with matches in a house made of gasoline. The fast movers are the neighbors trying to get us to stop before we burn down the whole block, including their houses. Have you shared this analysis with anyone? I've tried, sent it to the Pentagon, NASA, universities. Most people dismiss it as fringe science. The few who take it seriously can't get funding to study it properly. And the government agencies that might have the resources to investigate are the same ones that have been covering up the phenomenon for 70 years. Then we need to make enough noise that they can't ignore us, I said. We organized a press conference for March 2020. Morrison would present her analysis. I would provide the historical context from my fast mover encounters. Other veterans of the phenomenon would offer corroborating testimony. We'd make the case that humanity was approaching a critical threshold and needed to take the fast movers' warnings seriously. But 2 days before the scheduled conference, Morrison died. Heart attack, the medical examiner ruled. Natural causes. She was 78, had a history of cardiac issues. Nothing suspicious, except that her research notes disappeared from her home before her family could collect them. All her computers, hard drives, notebooks, gone. The only copies that existed were the ones she'd sent me a week earlier, encrypted and stored on a secure server. I went ahead with the press conference, but without Morrison's analysis, the impact was diminished. I could talk about fast mover encounters from the 1960s, but I couldn't present the sophisticated mathematical evidence that would have made the threat real and immediate. The media covered it, but it was treated as historical curiosity rather than urgent warning. Then came the pandemic. COVID-19 consumed all media attention. My revelations about fast movers got buried under 24/7 coverage of a more immediate crisis. The momentum we'd built evaporated. But the fast movers didn't stop. If anything, their activity increased. Reports came in from Navy pilots encountering UAPs daily over the Atlantic. Objects appearing on carrier group radars, performing impossible maneuvers, seemingly interested in nuclear-powered vessels. In 2021, the Pentagon finally released a report acknowledging that UAPs were real and represented flight characteristics we couldn't explain. It was vindication of everything I'd been saying for decades. But it was also frustrating because the report raised more questions than it answered and stopped short of addressing the core issue, what these objects wanted and why they were here. I'm 85 years old now, writing this in 2024. I don't know how much longer I have, but I need to make sure this information survives me. Morrison's analysis, my documentation, the testimony of everyone who witnessed the phenomenon, because the fast movers are still appearing, still transmitting, still trying to warn us. And according to Morrison's calculations, we're running out of time. The threshold she identified, the point where our nuclear weapons configuration triggers the dimensional breach, is getting close. Based on current deployment patterns and weapons modernization programs, we'll reach it sometime between 2035 and 2040. Less than 15 years from now. What happens then? Will the fast movers intervene directly? Will they disable all our nuclear weapons, forcing the disarmament they've been encouraging? Or will they evacuate and let us face the consequences of ignoring their warnings? I don't know, but I've spent 58 years thinking about these objects, these beings, their motivations, and I've come to believe they're not our enemies. They're desperate neighbors trying to prevent a catastrophe that would affect more than just Earth. Think about it. They could have destroyed our civilization decades ago if that was their intent. They have technology far beyond ours. But instead of attacking, they've been warning us. Communicating through mathematics and conceptual frameworks we can barely understand. Disabling some weapons while leaving others functional, showing restraint even when we fired on them. That's not the behavior of invaders or conquerors. That's the behavior of concerned observers trying to prevent a tragedy. After the 2021 Pentagon report, I was contacted by a former Project Aquarius member, someone who'd been part of the program after I left, who'd continued working on fast mover communication through the 1970s and 1980s. He told me something that changed my understanding of everything. The communication didn't stop when the program was officially shut down. It went deeper underground. A classified effort involving the highest levels of government, continuing Morrison's work, attempting to establish sustained dialogue with the fast movers. And they succeeded. Not publicly, not officially, but they made contact. Established a communication channel, and learned the full truth about why the fast movers are here. My contact couldn't give me details. He was still bound by security oaths that carried real consequences, but he gave me enough to understand the basic situation. The fast movers are monitoring humanity because we're developing technology in ways that could affect dimensional stability across a wide area of space-time. Nuclear weapons are just the most obvious concern. We're also creating problems with quantum computing, particle physics experiments, and other cutting-edge research that pokes at the fundamental structure of reality. The beings piloting the fast movers are part of a larger community. Not aliens from another planet in our universe, but entities from adjacent dimensions or parallel realities. And our reckless experimentation is creating ripples that affect their reality as well as ours. They've been trying to guide our development, slow us down in dangerous areas, encourage us toward safer technological paths, but we haven't been listening, and their patience is running out. The communication channel my contact described isn't about negotiation or cooperation. It's about ultimatums. The fast movers have made it clear, stop the dangerous experimentation, or they'll stop it for us. And if they have to intervene directly, the consequences for human civilization will be severe. So, we're approaching a decision point. As a species, as a civilization, we need to choose. Do we continue our current trajectory, pushing forward with nuclear proliferation and exotic physics research without regard for warnings from beings who understand reality better than we do? Or do we listen? Slow down. Except that maybe we don't know everything, and our actions have consequences beyond what we can see. I know what my choice would be. I've spent nearly 60 years watching the fast movers try to communicate with us. I've seen their restraint, their patience, their repeated attempts to warn us about dangers we don't fully understand. If beings with technology centuries or millennia ahead of ours are telling us to be careful, we should probably listen. But I'm just one old man. I don't have power over nuclear policy or scientific research priorities. All I can do is share what I know and hope it makes a difference. This is my final testimony. Everything I've witnessed, everything I've learned, everything I believe about the fast movers and why they're here. I've left copies of this document with trusted individuals who will ensure it gets published if anything happens to me. And I've uploaded all my documentation to secure servers that will release it publicly under certain conditions. The fast movers are real. They've been visiting Earth since at least 1947, possibly longer. They demonstrate technology far beyond our current capabilities. They've been specifically monitoring our nuclear weapons and disabling some of them. They've attempted communication using mathematical and conceptual frameworks we're only beginning to understand. And they've warned us that we're approaching a threshold that, once crossed, will have catastrophic consequences. Whether you believe me or not is up to you. But I'd encourage you to pay attention. Watch for fast mover reports. Notice the patterns. See how military and government responses are changing. And ask yourself, why would so many credible witnesses, pilots, controllers, scientists, military personnel, risk their reputations to report these encounters if there wasn't something real happening? The 3:33 a.m. pattern continues. Right now, tonight, fast movers are appearing over military installations around the world. They're performing their impossible maneuvers, transmitting their mathematical warnings, monitoring our nuclear weapons. And they're waiting to see if humanity is wise enough to listen, waiting to see if we'll slow down, reconsider our dangerous trajectory, accept guidance from beings who've traveled further down the technological path than we have, or waiting to see if they'll need to intervene, to force the changes we're unwilling to make voluntarily, to protect their reality from the damage our ignorance might cause. I hope we choose wisdom. I hope we listen, because I don't think we'll like the alternative. But whatever happens, I can die knowing I tried. I documented the truth. I shared what I knew. I warned anyone who would listen that the fast movers are real. They're here for a reason, and their patience won't last forever. The rest is up to you. To all of us, to humanity as a whole. Choose carefully. Time is limited. And remember, every night at 3:33 a.m., they're still watching, still waiting, still hoping we'll understand before it's too late.